What's up, y'all? Welcome on into the GoVols247 Podcast. Wes Rucker coming to you from Fort Rucker Studio here on a pleasant Wednesday afternoon in God's own Knoxville, Tennessee. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope everything in your life is going good. I hope that you've been able to calm down a little bit since the college football playoff rankings went out. You know, if you're working for Tennessee Athletics and you get to go to the Bahamas this week, I bet that just for a few days anyways, you might just forget how much you hate the college football playoff rankings because you'll be in the Bahamas. And we are going to tie those things together, talk a little Tennessee football and basketball here on this edition of the podcast. Going to go on down to that unspecified home studio that we still haven't had a name for, and I'd like to name at some point for Ben McKee, even though he doesn't want to name it. Ben, what's up, man?
Not a whole lot. Just trying to keep my head above water these days. That's all I'm trying to do. Something the committee apparently is also struggling to do.
Yes, it is. It's interesting. I mean, if you've been on the site, you've seen that we've all, for most of us anyways, I think have opined on it. I wrote a column. Other guys have been on the board and talked about how nonsensical in some ways the CFP rankings are. The bottom line is right now, Tennessee's ranking, which I don't have a huge issue with, is 11th overall, but that means the Tennessee would not be in the playoff if it started today. The Vols would be the first team out because Boise State, BYU, some others have to be in there. And so the way that Tennessee was kind of split in the SEC rankings is some version of kind of what I think most of us thought it would be, Ben. There's Bama at 7 seemed a bit high, but Bama and then Ole Miss at 9, Georgia at 10, Tennessee at 11. Now, I have said that my first thought on it was kind of the same, which is that I would have had Tennessee probably 4th in those rankings, if I'm being honest, of those 4 teams. However, I would have had Georgia over Ole Miss because I think overall the whole body of work, it's probably a little bit better. I think there's 2 tiers of resumes in the SEC, or 3 tiers. One, Texas is kind of on its own for now, but if it loses, it goes to the back of the line, I think. Number 2, that second tier, Georgia and Bama, and then just one smidgen behind it would be Tennessee and Ole Miss. And I think you could put Georgia and Bama in either order. I think you could put Tennessee or Ole Miss in either order. But my issue, Ben, was not with Tennessee's ranking. And if yours is with Tennessee's, I hope you say so. But I don't think you have a huge bone to pick there, maybe a little one. But my problem is that there are still 4 teams in the Big Ten in the top 5. And that has never happened in the history of college football. The AP poll, the final AP poll, started in 1939, never had 4 Big Ten teams in it. And that's including the 4 West Coast teams every year. Like, I'm just suggesting for the sake of argument that they've been in the Big Ten the entire time. That's never happened. So the teams with the weakest schedules continue to be at the top of the poll because they have fewer losses. And I wonder if the weaker schedule might just be why they haven't lost football games. And if you don't think that's a trend, look at Texas. The highest ranked team in the SEC right now has played the lowest strength of schedule of any of those SEC teams that are right behind it. So I'm not going to say I'm at a loss for words because I got plenty of words. But what this looks like, Ben, is sometimes the appearance of something bad is just as bad as something bad actually happening. It looks like right now that there is an outgoing Big Ten sitting commissioner on this committee putting 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5, one of which, Indiana, has played the weakest schedule of any team in Power Conference football, 106th nationally. It will play one tough game all season long. And we'll see. Maybe it ends up being all right in the end. Maybe Ohio State takes care of business and Indiana gets put lower, much lower where it belongs, but doesn't look good.
It doesn't on November 20th. There's a couple of different thoughts there. Obviously, the first being I do agree with what you're saying, But I also don't understand being frustrated on November 20th. And I'm not speaking to you, obviously. A lot of college football fans are upset by where Indiana is ranked. And I get it. I'm not saying that I don't get it. I just don't understand why you would work yourself up about it when you know there's a big showdown this weekend, Saturday at noon p.m. Eastern on noon p.m. That's a new one, noon Eastern
I wasn't going
on
to say anything. I wasn't going to say anything.
well, you don't have to worry. I'll call myself out. I'll be the first to raise my hand. But Ohio State, Indiana is going to sort itself out this weekend. If Ohio State beats Indiana, then I assume that it is going to take care of itself. We've already seen the committee drop teams pretty significantly after skating by in games and then eventually losing. That's what we just saw happen to BYU. We've seen that happen to Georgia this year. Teams who have not necessarily passed the eye test but kept winning, when they eventually lost, they have been dropped, and pretty significantly. And that's what will happen to Indiana if it does, in fact, play out the way that a lot of people think that it is going to. Now, I do think Indiana is a better team
Sure.
than a lot of people are suggesting. I think too many people are looking at the logo on the side of the helmet. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves in sports, is thinking because a team has been this traditionally that it will always be that in the future or in the present. That annoys me. But do I think Ohio State is going to win? Yes. Am I convinced that they're just going to blow out Indiana? No, I'm not. And maybe I look silly here in a couple of days for suggesting that, but I think there's some things that Indiana does really well that can give Ohio State problems. And it's not like Ohio State has passed the eye test all year long either. So that alone is just going to work itself out, Wes, with Indiana losing if it does. And then if Indiana beats Ohio State, why should Indiana not be number 1, number 2 in the country?
It should be number 2 behind Oregon.
Yes, that would be my thinking as well. So I just don't understand the uproar, given it's going to work itself out. I understand that it's frustrating in the process. I'm frustrated because the committee just goes with whichever way the wind is blowing from week to week. There's no set criteria that they consistently follow. It feels like they almost make it up as they go, which can be very frustrating. And one of those, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I'm slower to jump on the whole Big Ten is colluding to get Big Ten teams in. I'm certainly kind of paying attention to the situation, but I'm more in the wait and see mode of seeing how it plays out, because like I hear you with your stat about 4 teams being ranked in the top 5 or whatever it is. Well, one of those teams is new to the league in Oregon, and Oregon is by far the best team in the country at the moment. So that helps prop up the Big Ten at the moment.
No, I was including. I was with that number. I was saying the 4 teams from the West Coast are in the league the entire time since 1939. It still hasn't happened where any collection of those 16 teams was in the top 5.
My biggest gripe is with Penn State. They're the ones that I have an issue with, and I think it ultimately boils down to when you win and when you lose, because that's something that Tennessee is experiencing right now. Where would Alabama be ranked if Tennessee beat Alabama this past weekend? They would probably be out of the playoff bracket at the moment. And where would Tennessee be right now if its Georgia loss was end of September, early October, after the Arkansas loss? Then you're probably bumped up even more. So that's something that's annoying to me, is that like the beginning of the season just doesn't matter by the time we get to the end of the season, which is a whole separate issue. But it's not black or white. I mean, we could go on and on for hours about different situations, different critiques, different things that annoy us. To me, the Indiana thing, which seems to be the hottest topic, maybe I'm wrong on that, but it feels like the hottest topic. To me, there's just no sense in getting worked up about it, because it's going to work itself out theoretically this weekend. And for Tennessee, like I didn't have a problem with where they're ranked either. And the head-to-head with Alabama, I do hate that people are diminishing that. I just saw a minute ago Nicole Auerbach, who writes for NBC, she at 7:14 p.m., right when the rankings were being released, said, "I agree with the committee going Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee. That's how I have it too. takes the Alabama-Tennessee head-to-head out of it. So that comes off as she does not agree with the head-to-head being in Tennessee's favor, correct, Wes? That's how you interpret that?
I think
That's
so.
how I interpreted that. And then
Yeah, but
she comes back today, 4 hours ago, and posts a piece of a column that she wrote, and the first sentence is, what teams have done on the field should matter. You can't sit here and say during the rankings release that you agree with the committee taking the head-to-head factor out of Tennessee, Alabama out of the equation. You can't say that you agree with that and then turn around and write a column about how what teams have done on the field should matter because you're propping up the Big Ten and Big Ten country, which is where you hail from. Those are the types of things that I find very annoying. And while I agree with the order of the two-loss SEC teams at the moment, and I will explain why here in just a moment, I don't like that the head-to-head with Tennessee and Alabama is not being viewed in the way that it should be. That's my biggest gripe with Tennessee's resume and slotting at the moment, is that people are not giving Tennessee enough credit for its win over Alabama, which does continue to look better and better. And it's a better win than a lot of teams have in front of them as well. And then, like, you see things, the contradiction is what I'm getting at that just really annoys me. Nicole Auerbach contradicting herself, the committee constantly contradicting themselves. ESPN, I realize that they're not the ones ranking teams, but it is their network that they're broadcasting these rankings on each week. We talk about conspiracy theories and whatnot, but on Texas's profile that they boast, it includes Texas's win over Arkansas as an impressive win, and then you hear Ward Manuel talk about Tennessee and what they don't like about Tennessee's resume and mention Arkansas's loss. And again, I recognize ESPN, selection committee, supposed to be two different things, right? But it's just still, there's a little bit of contradiction there. That's the most annoying thing to me is just the contradiction and a lot of people not weighting the head-to-head and what I feel like it should be. But in terms of the two-loss SEC teams, I did think that it was ranked properly for the most part, aside from the Tennessee-Alabama head-to-head, because at the end of the day, Tennessee's resume, it is lacking. It is, because you count up the win-loss record of Georgia's and Ole Miss's and Alabama's opponents this year. It's better than the opponents that Tennessee has played. So we can't talking about contradicting, we can't contradict ourselves by diminishing Indiana's strength of schedule, Penn State's, Texas's, but then also try to prop up Tennessee's when technically Tennessee's is lacking behind those other two-loss SEC teams in Georgia, Alabama, and Ole Miss.
And that's why I have no serious issue with the SEC rankings, because inside the CFP, I mean, I think I'm not going to sit here and talk out of both sides of my mouth. I think the problem is that some teams are being rewarded way too much for playing nobody. And I can't sit here and say, well, Tennessee's schedule is not as good as those other three. And Tennessee's game control, while it's good, it's 10th nationally, it's still fourth of those four teams. Like, when you break up the resumes and you try your best, because I think you have to almost take head-to-head out of it when you've got three or four teams that have all beaten each other. And that makes it really confusing. So that means you have to almost forget that happened, unless one was a road win. Then you take that into consideration, I think, strong consideration. But there wasn't. I mean, they were all home wins. And so I think you kind of put those teams in a line and you say, okay, who has the actual best resume here? And I don't think I would have had Bama in front of Miami, or I would have had Miami behind all four of those SEC teams, because I think it's a better resume. Now, Miami did beat Florida, which has gotten better as the season's gone on. But my fundamental problem with Indiana is one that, even if it sorts itself out, I don't know why they're running the risk of that going wrong, because Indiana has played the 106th schedule out of 134 teams in FBS football. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't care that Indiana's undefeated. I do not care. Why an Army in the top 10 if we're going to do this? Like, I don't.
Well, because somehow Army has played an even
Yes.
softer strength of schedule.
But I mean, the difference between where Indiana and most of power conference football is greater than the difference between where Indiana and where Army is. Like, it's a greater statistical difference. And so, how many times do we see this where teams are, beating people and they just kind of stop in the fourth quarter or the second half? They put other guys in, they kind of run the clock. Maybe just stop doing that. Maybe just forever stop doing that. You play all 60 minutes to beat the ever living hell out of everybody you're playing that you can, because, hey, it's like, I'm sorry, Jeff Levy. I'm sorry you're my bro, but the ball's on the 4-yard line. There's a minute left. I'm sticking it in the end zone because, well, I got to look at the playoff committee. I mean, this is what, if you don't play anybody, that's what you're going to have to start doing when you play somebody who's not very good. No more mercy, no anything, because Indiana is being rewarded for playing nobody. And it's, I don't see how, this precedent does anything for a committee or for ADs except for, and coaches, except for them saying, I'm not going to play anybody because look, here's what I can do. And if that's the precedent that we want, okay, you can't blame Indiana for Indiana's conference schedule. You can't do that because that's not something that they asked for. But go look at the 3 non-conference teams that Indiana played. You know what they're doing.
The 3 non-conference teams they played after they bought out an opponent. I'm forgetting the opponent that they bought out off the top of my head.
And I don't remember it either. I don't. Honestly, I don't. But like, if you're Texas and you schedule Michigan, and it's a couple months after Michigan wins the national title, you expect that brand is going to put a really good product on the field and give you a good game. So when that doesn't happen, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying it's different. When you're Indiana and you schedule those teams you scheduled, you know what the hell you're doing. You know exactly what you're doing. You are trying to make sure you get to a bowl game. That's what you're doing. And I just don't think, like, once Indiana, I'd have been okay with Indiana being something around 10th, 11th, 12th now. And then if they play Ohio State competitively, then you bump them up because then there's a baseline. Right now, there is no baseline for what Indiana is. And a team like that being ranked in the top 5 in late November, it's dangerous. It's not good for the game. You have to play somebody. The last thing I'll say on this, Ben, that Arkansas team that Tennessee lost to, Tennessee's bad loss, on the road, at night, at Arkansas, final play of the game. Arkansas is better on paper than any single team Indiana has played. I mean, this is not, these things are so close, or they're so different that they're not even the same sport almost. Like these two schedules are in different galaxies. And how can you not punish a team that hasn't played anybody? Like, you're not even really punishing them yet. You're making the grade incomplete because there is no baseline for what they are. Now, if they lose, the problem I have is, let's say they're down by 17 or 20 points at the end of that game. Let's say that Ohio State wants to back off at that point. Don't want the quarterback to get hurt because then you might, be out of the playoff. So then Indiana sticks in a touchdown late in the game that means nothing, but it gets them within 2 scores. And now all of a sudden you're giving Indiana that 4th spot in the Big Ten, and you're not having another team from the SEC in there. I have that situation absolutely cannot happen. And I think because Indiana is 5th now, it absolutely would happen. And that is why this matters. People can sit here and say it's dumb. People could say it doesn't matter to the final poll. I get it. But because you've got Indiana where you've got them, you are giving them wiggle room that they have not earned at all. And you could say the same with Penn State. And you almost kind of could hint that with Notre Dame. Because Notre Dame has one of the better wins. It has unequivocally the worst loss, without question. Northern Illinois, 7th best team in the MAC at Notre Dame. Notre Dame 6th. So I'm not saying Notre Dame can't be in the college football playoff because of that one game. I am saying when you lose a home game to Northern Illinois, you can't play a home game in the playoff. You just can't. Like, these teams are being rewarded for playing nobody right now. That sucks.
Yeah, it's not fun. But we'll see how the season finishes out, because a lot of those teams have an opportunity to go earn a spot. If Indiana beats Ohio State, they absolutely deserve to get in. If they lose close, then I don't know. Maybe we need to readjust our thinking on if Indiana is one of the 12 best teams in the country, regardless of who they have played to this point. I don't know. It's there's a lot of hypotheticals right now with Indiana, which is why I just don't see the sense in getting worked up about something that's should play itself out down the road and as soon as this weekend. But it's not just Indiana. I mean, Notre Dame, they've got two somewhat big time games coming up these last 2 weeks of the season. Army this weekend at Yankee Stadium, and then USC. I mean, both of those games it's not as difficult as playing at Ohio State like Indiana is, but it's also not playing what Indiana has up until this point. So a lot of these teams are going to have an opportunity to go out and really earn it. Tennessee had an opportunity to go out and earn their playoff spot this past weekend, and they fumbled the football.
Yep.
Texas is going to have an opportunity as well, with the game against Texas A&M coming up next week. And I'm forgetting who they play this week. Do you know off the top of your head? Kentucky?
Who plays?
Texas.
Yes, I believe it is UK. Let me double check.
Ole Miss. Ole Miss is kind of right there in the mix as well, and they'll play Florida this week in the Swamp at noon. Texas is playing Kentucky at home at 3:30 on ABC. So there's a couple of these teams that they're going to have to go out and earn their playoff spot, because if they lose, then they're going to get dropped, and then all of a sudden Tennessee is sitting right there. Tennessee could be in a whole lot worse situation. It's not in the best situation, obviously, but I'd rather be the first team out than the third or fourth team out at this point in the season, because there are still several ways that you can get in, even if you are relying on others to help you get in. Miami, they need to handle business, or else they'll find themselves in Tennessee's shoes. So it'll all work itself out, but there's no doubt that the inconsistencies from the committee are very frustrating. All wins and losses, as weird as it sounds, are not created equal, because these teams are not playing the same schedules, and therefore and it's not even disrespect to the Big Ten. I mean, if your conference schedule is in the triple digits, it should just not be viewed as your win-loss record with that schedule should not be viewed as a team with one or two fewer losses that's playing a top 30, top 40, even top 50 type of schedule. It just should not be viewed the same way, and the committee is doing that on top of doing other things like sneaking Missouri into the rankings so that they can prop up other teams and their win, so they can prop up Alabama and allow Alabama to have an extra top 25 win, allow South Carolina to have an extra top 25 win. And I think A&M benefits from Missouri sneaking in as well, because I think A&M, yes, I remember that game. A&M beat down Missouri, if I'm not mistaken, just before midway through the year. So it's not just Alabama that the Missouri sneaking into the rankings props up. It's Alabama, South Carolina, which isn't technically out of it just yet, and it's Texas A&M. So it's just all the sneaky little things that they're doing, and the inconsistencies, and it's all very, very frustrating. But at the end of the day, it does feel like a lot of these games we have coming up over the next 2 weeks to end the regular season, and then conference championship week, even if the process is frustrating, it does seem like it's going to work itself out to a certain extent.
I agree. And last couple of things I'll say. One, my stance on this is, I understand the argument that it'll work itself out, because most of the time it does. But I also kind of subscribe to the theory of don't go to sleep with the stove on. Like, if you go to sleep with the stove on, there's a better chance your house burns. And it probably won't. It probably won't. It'll probably be fine. But what if it's not? Don't go to bed with the stove on. Don't go to bed with the candle burning. Don't do these things. And there's a better chance your house doesn't burn to the ground. And that's why I'm sitting here saying right now the college football playoff committee is taking a nap at least with the stove on. And that's what you've done with some of these rankings. You have led to a better chance your house is burning down. So either you're an arsonist or you're lazy. And I don't know, I mean, but that's how I see it anyway. I might be wrong, but that's how I see it. I will say one really good bit of news for Tennessee, because if the ESPN analysts are admitting this on air, then I think the college football playoff committee would seriously discuss it, is that if Texas loses to A&M, Texas goes to the back of the line.
They should. They should be dropped the same way BYU was.
If that's what happens, because your best win right now, you don't have a win over a ranked team. And so that's your schedule overall more difficult than what those Big Ten teams have played. Except
would their best win be at Vanderbilt?
Yes, that would be their best win. It would be a road win. It would be a place where Alabama lost. Okay.
I bet it was not a road win.
No, it's not a true road.
Even for Texas.
It's just not. And so that's where things are right now. We'll see. I think
my last thought on the playoff rankings, can we mute Joey Galloway? I don't understand why I don't see Joey Galloway anywhere all week long. I don't see him on the weekend, and somehow every Tuesday night.
Does he do studio work on the weekends?
I maybe so. I don't know. I think he might be on the panel, the panel rotation on College Football Live or whatever the 30-minute weekly show is, weekday show is. I do not watch, if you cannot tell, but I prominently see Joey Galloway every Tuesday night, every year after the playoff rankings, and he consistently says the most absurd things week in and week out. I don't understand how I don't see him throughout the week, do not see him throughout the weekend, and then bam, every Tuesday night, every year, there he is saying one asinine thing after the next, and constantly cutting Greg McElroy off, constantly cutting Booger McFarland off. Just the whole Indiana quarterback and benching him this weekend, that really got under my skin, if you couldn't tell.
Yeah, there was maybe he sits there for 6 days and just like listens to "Lose Yourself" by Eminem and gets himself ready, like looking in the mirror, and then he's like, "It's Tuesday night, let's go, Mom Spaghetti, we're doing this."
It's like he's not allowed to talk Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and the first time he can talk is when those rankings come out. And boys, he wound up.
Well, it doesn't like Celine Dion, like she's got something with her voice now, so she can't sing except for like when she does concerts. So she like drinks tea all the time and doesn't talk because she's got something, but then she's like, I still got to perform. And Joey Galloway's like, Tuesday nights, I still got to perform, got to drink that tea, got to keep it calm, and then I got to go Tuesday and get my stuff in. I don't know, but that's where things are. We will see. I think there is a better chance than not that Ben is right and that this works itself out. I worry what happens when you go to sleep with the stove on. I'm not saying I'm the world's best husband or best dad. I do try to make sure the stove isn't on when everyone goes to sleep at night. So, that's sort of where we are. We'll see where things go. We do have a lot more to discuss on this episode. A lot of basketball, Tennessee basketball, the 11th ranked Vols heading to actually are in right now, Nassau, Bahamas, to get ready for a nice little weekend thing. It's a week earlier than usual, but it's still the holiday feast stuff. So we'll step away for a second, pay some bills, listen to products, services, in-house ads, etc. Then come back and talk some Tennessee basketball here on the GoVols247 Podcast. #ad. Welcome back to the GoVols247 Podcast, brought to you by whatever products, services, and in-house ads you just heard a moment ago during that commercial break. Wes Rucker and Ben McKee here talking a little Tennessee athletics at you. I would say talking with you, but you're just sitting here listening on a podcast, so I can't sit here and say that we're talking with you. But hopefully you're actually talking with people that you love right now and that you're all discussing this podcast. We got a lot more to discuss on this podcast. Going to talk a little Tennessee basketball here in this second segment. Before we do that, just a quick request from our end, if you'll permit us a second to do this, please take a minute out of your day right now and go rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Helps us out tremendously. Wherever you can cast the fine pod, you can find this GoVols247 podcast. We do this for free. We are happy to do it for free, and we're happy to bring you the weekday episodes, at least, right here on Facebook and on YouTube. We're happy to do those things, but since we do those things for free and we want to keep doing them for free, it's important that y'all keep going in there and rating, reviewing, subscribing, and telling friends. Leave fresh reviews. That helps a lot with the algorithms. And tell everyone you know about this podcast, everyone you know who likes Tennessee or loves Tennessee or hates Tennessee enough to listen. We take them all. Hate clicks are just like hate listens. They all count the same. So if you got somebody in your life who would like to hear about this podcast, please tell them. If you're already doing all that stuff, thank you. We love you. If not,
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Straight back into some basketball here, Ben. Tennessee heading down to Nassau, Bahamas for the Baha Mar Championship, I believe is what it is called down there in Nassau. Beautiful Nassau, Bahamas. Kind of wish I was there this week, but that's all right. Tennessee playing Virginia on Thursday night, 9:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network, which is, of course, the greatest sports network on all of television and in world history. And then Friday, the Vols will play either Baylor or St. John's. So that Friday game is Rick Barnes facing either Scott Drew or facing Rick Pitino. So that's a premier coaching matchup for you. And man, you talk about a pound for pound coaching matchup. If Tony Bennett hadn't retired, you talk about the four coaches that would have been in this tournament, like the aggregate score on that would be better than probably any other tournament postseason one, or like any other, like one of these preseason, early season tournaments, if I could get the words out of my mouth correctly. So big week for Tennessee. Obviously, Tony Bennett is not at Virginia anymore. That changes things a little bit, but still a big week for Tennessee.
It is, and unfortunately, Dalton Connect cannot meet the team in the Bahamas. He is too busy putting LeBron James and Anthony Davis on his back. What a performance from DK on Tuesday night. We are recording this just after lunch on Wednesday. So, Wes, I know you are a night owl. I am no longer a night owl with two of my kiddos keeping me plenty busy and draining my energy during the day. So I have a love-hate relationship with Dalton playing for the Lakers. And I don't even know that I would call it a love-hate relationship. I guess I hate it more than anything because most of the time when the Lakers play, they're playing on the West Coast, and I am sound asleep. I believe I was, when I was scrolling Twitter this morning, the highlights, I looked to see what time he was making all those threes, and it was like 12:30 in the morning, and that was like an hour and a half, 2 hours after I'd already fallen asleep. So do not enjoy that part of it. I wish he was on the West Coast or even playing somewhere in middle America so we could
the way I do it
at their hours.
Yeah, the way I do it is I cannot change the night owl status. So even when I have to, take the kid to school at like 7 a.m, I just come back home, and everyone on the staff knows this. I go back home, I flip on Air Disasters on Smithsonian. They're on Paramount Plus, and I doze right off. So that's how I try to keep it up a little bit.
Yeah, but no, it was really fun to watch him do that, and he's doing what everybody thought that he would, except for the 16 teams in front of the Lakers in the draft. But no, that was fun to see. Unfortunately, like I said, Tennessee cannot take Dalton to the Bahamas with them this year. Would be nice, not just because of how awesome of a basketball player he is, but Tennessee a bit banged up at the moment. Did have a story on the site during Tuesday's practice, middle of the day before they left for the Bahamas. If you missed that, Tennessee is dealing with the injury bug. There were 4 players that we had updates on. With Chaz Lanier, nothing too serious there, was dealing with a migraine, was not available at the beginning of practice, was just standing off to the side. And then I don't know what changed, but he eventually went down to the other side of the court, did some stretching and some drills with Garrett Medenwald, the strength coach. And then next thing you know, he's in full 5-on-5 team drills working out. So Chaz seems to be fine, and it was just a migraine at the end of the day, so would have been fine regardless. The bigger concern is with JP Estrella and Cameron Carr. JP Estrella dealt with a stress fracture in his foot over the offseason, and he was available to start the year, but it was still something that he was managing as they got into the season, and it's obviously not healing the way that they would prefer. Rick Barnes spoke after the Sunday evening win over Austin P that they're trying to come up with a different plan for JP Estrella. His practice participation was the same on Tuesday, dressed out, off working to the side, the same as it's been for weeks now. So we'll certainly update if anything changes there, but doesn't look like he'll be available this week. We'll see how that ends up playing out. Maybe it's gotten better since Sunday. We'll just have to keep an eye on that one. And then the new one and concerning one is Cameron Carr, who did not practice on Tuesday either. He appeared to hurt his hand, I believe it was his left hand, in at the end of the win over Austin P, and he was not he did not practice, and we'll see if he's available these next couple of days. I spoke to somebody following the game on Sunday night that did not seem too optimistic about the thumb on his left hand, so hopefully it doesn't turn out as bad as it sounded like it may actually be. Cam obviously trying to come into a key role for this basketball team at the moment and doesn't need to be slowed down by an injury, just like JP Estrella. The two young guys, they need reps. They need to be on the court, and right now some fluky injuries are keeping them off the court, but we'll see what their availability looks like for Thursday and Friday. The good news is that Darlington Dubar was a full participant during Tuesday's practice, and with Cam potentially out, with JP potentially out, maybe he's able to slide in there and earn some minutes that are unexpected, given he was away from the team for nearly 2 weeks with a personal matter. I know there were a lot of questions about that on our board, and it was not anything basketball related. I mentioned that several times. It was truly personal, and Tennessee left it at that. But he worked back into practice last week, but was dressed out, off working to the side by himself. Yesterday, he was with the team, 5-on-5 team drills, as if nothing ever happened. So that's obviously a good sign for Tennessee, and we'll see how he slides in here, because with JP potentially being out, that likely slides Cade Phillips over to the 5 if Felix Akpar's not in there, and then there's minutes up for grab. There's just minutes up for grab in the post, whichever way you play it. I mean, all those guys can kind of play the different positions inside. Igor, Felix, Cade, JP, and D-Stone. He's a Josiah Jordan James in terms of body type and position type of somebody that he's listed as a guard, but he's a bigger body, can play the 4, played a lot of the 4 at Hofstra, could probably in an emergency slide down and play the 5 as well, kind of like Jemai does. So that's something to keep an eye on, given the other injuries, if D-Stone gets back in a game maybe quicker than we thought.
Yeah, I think a few things on that. First off, with Dubar and the personal stuff, my policy, just generally speaking, is for a college basketball player, if something is described as a personal matter and there is like no arrest report, no disciplinary issue, then I tend to let that sleeping dog lie, because that, I just think, listen, we're in the news creating or news, like reporting business, news analysis business. But these are, I think they're adults, but they're really, really young adults or big kids. And I just, if they have a personal matter and they're not in trouble, really, I don't feel the compelled to go report that, unless somebody goes on the record and they want to talk about it, or something's on an arrest report or something. So I just don't, that's how I am with that stuff. But everyone else is different. Everyone does their own thing, but that's my belief on it anyway. But I think with that, I think Estrella, watching him play, and you've been to more practices than I have been, but watching him run when I have the past couple months, he's clearly not like 100%. Like, he's a little bit, I don't know if janky's not the right word, but you know what I mean? Like he's not rhythmic, he's not in great shape. He's favoring that foot a little bit. He just doesn't, he's clearly a good athlete, but he's not doing everything he can do. And that's what it looks like to me anyway. And so I would think the problem there is you need to rest that foot, but you need him in basketball shape. So what do you do? That's probably my guess would be that maybe is why they're having to come up with a new plan. I don't know if he rides the bike more or stay in cardio shape. Like I don't know, but that sucks for him. It does. And for Carr, that really sucks too, because it looks like he's finally starting to get some things, doesn't it? Like it looks like he's finally starting to figure out how he can play the way Rick Barnes wants him to play to help the team. And, gradually, and you know how Rick Barnes is with this stuff, he's going to focus on your defense and the things you don't do well and those little details. And when you start doing those details more and more, the leash gets a little bit longer on offense. Like he's like, it's like a trust thing, right? Like if I can trust you on defense and I can trust you to not turn the ball over, then I will trust you more to take some shots and be yourself. And so that's when he could really shine and really pop. I've always said, I don't know when Cam Carr pops, but when he pops, he's really going to pop. And that's where they are. But I would imagine that now the question is there's little problems with this, Ben. One would be foul trouble becomes more of an issue. I think they have enough bodies, but if they get several guys in foul trouble, if they run to one of those nights and they're down a couple guys, that could be really problematic. That could be an issue. And now I worry also that there's more opportunities for them to have two non-shooter lineups, and I don't love those.
No, not ideal. The good news is that it's November and not February, March. So if you end up being put into a compromised situation and you lose because you're short on bodies, this, that, or the other, then I think you can swallow a loss because of those circumstances today much better than at the end of the year. But I mean, the expectation obviously is still to go out and win and be competitive, and losing would be disappointing because Zakai Ziegler still going to play unless something pops up. Chaz Lanier going to play. Jemai Meshack, Igor, those guys are all going to play. Jordan Gainey, who I think is playing really, really well right now. Felix Okpara, all of your main guys are going to play. You need JP Estrella and Cam Carr to tap into their potential and play to their ability this season to elevate your ceiling as a team overall and potentially make a Final Four run. I would be surprised if Tennessee were able to make a Final Four run without either of those two young players somewhat tapping into their potential and playing a big role for this team this year. But in terms of these two games, Virginia on Thursday night, which not in a great place at the program, at least not in the place it was when it won a championship, obviously, you should still handle business. Again, I mentioned Chaz was somewhat in and out of practice yesterday. It's not like he's the one that's going to be missing action. It would be a different story if he was the one that we're talking about is going to be out potentially for a couple of games. So the expectation is obviously to still win, and it'll be a nice step up in competition these next 2 days, even if Virginia isn't quite what it once was. And then Friday night's game should be terrific. Baylor, really good. Once again, they did get their teeth kicked into Gonzaga a couple of weeks ago. That was a bloodbath when those two teams played. But Scott Drew's program is still a strong one, and then Rick Pitino has St. John's going in the right direction as well. So I feel like this team is continuing to get better from game to game. It's early, but from game to game, there's been noticeable aspects of this team that have gotten better. Everybody was freaking out about the team shooting after the exhibition loss to Indiana, in which Rick Barnes purposefully did not click all the right buttons, press all the right buttons, and now look at them. Back-to-back games where they shot over 60%. And I don't care if it's Montana or Austin Peay. I mean, you knock down shots, you knock down shots. Mm-hmm. And my point that I'm getting to is we'll learn a lot more about this Tennessee basketball team this week, and I'm always excited about that in the early season because these can be good reference points of things to come.
Yeah, I think there's, Virginia is undefeated, but it beat Villanova on a neutral floor. That's not really, necessarily what everybody thinks it is. I don't think right now. I mean, Villanova's obviously Jay Wright's not there. It's different, right? It just is right now. So, and then had a close win over Campbell and like a 17-point win over Coppin State. So nothing that really jumps out at you as, oh wow, that's really, really, that looks really good, and so yeah,
They do have a piece though. Their resume doesn't stand out to you, but Virginia's guard, their junior guard Isaac McNeely, he is in fuego from behind the 3-point line at the moment, and I imagine Jemai Mashak will draw that responsibility, draw that matchup, and obviously you trust Jemai against anybody, and I doubt that he'll be on him 100% of the time. That's usually not Tennessee's MO. That they usually like to switch off, and Jemai's not going to play 40 minutes, so somebody else is going to have to chip in. Obviously, whether that be Zakai or whether that be Gainey or somebody else, but he's averaging 16 points a game and is 11 of 17 from three to start the season. 64% shooting percentage from three to begin the season. Last time I checked, when you're shooting 64% from three and you're taking a decent amount of them, that's a pretty good clip.
Yeah, when you are shooting threes better than big men shoot free throws, you're usually doing pretty well, I would say. So, yeah, and I think it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things on this team that have caught my eye as interesting so far this season. And the first thing I would say was, there seems to be this sort of, I don't want to say consensus, but there are a lot of people in the national college basketball media apparatus who have sort of already had an offhand remark here or there saying, well, Tennessee isn't what it was last season, but it looks like this is another pretty good team. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? I don't know.
I would disagree with that.
I don't know that. I mean, I think it's possible. Yeah. I mean, when you were an Elite 18 that won an SEC title, like, yeah, maybe you're a step below that. Sure. That's fair. Like, but I think it's not quite as simple as saying, well, Connect's gone, Adu's gone. So, things are, Vescovy's gone, like things are going to be different. I mean, I don't, Josiah Jordan James, who I think that is a much bigger loss than people think it is. He's gone. And so I think Chaz Lanier may not be Dalton Connect, but he'll have some games that are like Connect, and he's really, really good. And I think if people are forgetting that, okay, stop doubling him for a game and see what happens. Like stop throwing bodies at him all the time and see what happens. Like he'll go off. People know that he can do this because he's done it for a lot of his career at other places. He can go off. He's 6'5", 6'6" guard, do a lot of stuff. He's really good. This team has an older, better, and in better shape Zakai Ziegler with a full offseason. Jemai Mashak looks to me like he's never an offensive dynamo, but he's a lot better offensively this season and more confident, it looks like. I think Okpara can defend the rim every bit as well as Adu can. And I think physically he can do a couple of things Adu can't do, like those lobs, all that stuff. Like, he'll go finish through contact. And that was something that Jonas struggled with at times. No offense to Jonas. Hope he does great at Arkansas. But I think there are some things that Adu does better than Okpara. And I think there are some things Okpara does better than Adu. And I think those things could help. And then I'm interested in Cade Phillips for a couple different reasons, Ben. One is, you remember how everyone knows how fun it was. Like everyone knows how fun it was to look at John Fulkerson and how awkwardly he did a lot of things. And to me, Cade Phillips it's not quite that, but it's kind of fun and awkward. Like, so the way he hits the deck, the way that he throws himself around like a crash test dummy, like there's some interesting things about this. I think he's one of those guys that sometimes you kind of have to look at what he's doing and not how he's doing it. But, he had a couple of turnovers the other day, but weren't good. And he got benched for it. But then he came back in and was great. And he was doing a lot of things. And I think he's a guy who I can see why the coaching staff loves him. He's one of those guys who kind of sees what the program is about, and he's going to be one of those glue type guys. He can see the floor a little bit. He can pass it. He brought the ball up, and until he threw the pass away, he looked comfortable as could be bringing the ball up the floor. I mean, there's some things about his game that I think are interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. A much more athletic version of John Fulkerson, and I think he gets done on the floor what he needs to get done perfectly fine. Folky, I don't see Cade flopping around, flailing around the way John Fulkerson did. I think he's stronger. I think he's got more bounce. I just think he's more athletic than Folky. I think it looks a lot smoother. He's just inexperienced, and Rick Barnes has spoke about that quite a bit of late when asked about Cade. I mean, he said after the Louisville game that they want Cade to be the next Jemai Mashak. That tells you all you need to know about what the coaches think of Cade, and he is somebody. And what Rick means when he says that is somebody that can guard 1 through 5 and be one of the absolute best defenders in the country, if not the best defender in the country, like Jemai is. And although Cade's body is different than Jemai's, and mostly in terms of the height, like they realize that that's a lofty goal. Rick said that in the press conference after Louisville, that it's lofty to think that he could be the next Jemai Mashak, but they think it's in him, and that's why Rick is so hard on him. So they're never going to ask him to be Zakai or do what Grant Williams did from an offensive production or anything like that, but he can be a really, really key role player for a winning basketball team. In a team that makes an Elite Eight run, wins an SEC championship, goes to the Sweet 16, he can be a pivotal piece, and I think you've seen that here in the early going. For him, obviously he does all the plays that you don't get as much credit for in the box score. The next step for him is providing more offensively, of course, and that's what Rick has talked about, just slowing down offensively. He just gets sped up, turns it over, like you mentioned, and that's just a byproduct of inexperience, I think. And I think the more he gets out there and plays, the more and more of a dominating presence he is going to have. And I truly believe in that word, that Cade can be dominating in the things that don't show up as prominently on the box score, the blocks, the rebounds, the boxing out, the hustle plays that your team has to have somebody do, that Tennessee prides itself on doing and has during the Rick Barnes era. Cade Phillips is next in line to fulfill those responsibilities and do it at a high level.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that you said what you said about the flailing stuff, because I don't mean that he's, like Fulkerson, who's just getting knocked around sometimes because he's like 102 pounds. I'm just saying he throws himself around with such recklessness that he occasionally, aggressiveness / recklessness, that he hits the deck a lot during the game. Like he will jump up in the air when he knows he's going to get undercut and fall to the floor. He will dive into a loose ball against 3 guys and try to come up with the ball like that. He is like naturally super aggressive. And if you're going to be like an energy guy, you can't fake that. You have to have natural energy. You can't be timid. Like, you're going to make some mistakes, but you're not going to make them passively. You're going to make them aggressively. And I love that. I mean, I said during the game and in our thread on the board, I said, I know that Cade just got benched for what he did. I know Phillips just got benched, but I like that they had to bench him because he was being aggressive. Like, it's not like he was, oh, I forgot to guard this guy, or, oh, I got boxed out for a rebound, or, oh, I let somebody rip the ball from me. No, like, he threw a pass, where he shouldn't. And, he was trying to make plays that maybe they're not the most natural for him to make unless it's necessary. So I like that. I mean, to me, that shows me that he's got the what's the word here? The guts to go do it. And I like that. I think that shows that this is a guy who knows he wasn't like a 5-star prospect. He knows that, but he thinks he belongs out there. He thinks he can make plays, and he's athletic enough to do it. Like, he is very, very athletic. He goes up and gets it. Like, he could be a guy who, not that he would, because you have Akpar on your team and he's got gadget arms, but like he could go like do the opening tip. Like he's an explosive leaper and he's a good athlete. And so I like that about him. And I think he's a guy that, do I love it when he and Okpara play at the same time? Most of the time I wouldn't love that because, neither one's a shooter, but they are so active defensively at their size and so physical that there could be a use for it. I mean, because I say I don't love two non-shooter rotations, Ben, that doesn't mean that like there's never a practical use for them. I just don't like the old school method of leaning on them because I think in this area you have to space the floor. Like look at when Milicic is out there at the 4, and now that teams know they got to go back out there, wait to see how much more stuff opens up in the paint because you got 4 guys around there, around Okpara or Phillips or whoever it is, and 4 guys who can shoot. And so you have to cover all of that territory. That means all that cutting. That means all that spacing. You're going to have some wide open looks at the rim. And you get more of those if teams know they have to go out and guard all 4 guys when they step outside, or 4 of the 5, because, that it helps. Now, if you're like the old Warriors or whatever, and you got to do all 5, that's a nightmare for people. But 4 is pretty hard too.
Yeah, it is for sure. And I think it's more likely that you see Felix or Cade on the floor at once than both of them on the floor at once. Now, I agree with what you were saying about the 3-point shooting and spacing the floor offensively. But boy, do I love it when Cade Phillips and Felix Okpara are on the floor together from a defensive standpoint, because nobody, absolutely nobody, is getting a shot off at the rim with those 2 guys in the game. And I mean, if Felix is not blocking it, then Cade is blocking it. And I think it was the Louisville game in which that really stood out to me, in which when Felix and Cade were both on the floor. Not that Louisville is some daunting offense, but they just got nothing when either of those guys were in the game, and partly because Cade, he doesn't have to be around the rim to be effective defensively. So when you're playing these high-powered offenses in the SEC, first and foremost Alabama and Auburn, that's a defensive lineup that, yeah, maybe you give a little offensively, but theoretically you're making it up on the defensive end because you're getting nothing inside the paint. And then you have Zakai Ziegler, Jemai Mashak, and somebody else feasting on the perimeter, harassing guards on the perimeter. So I am with you offensively with that lineup, but defensively you may be able to make up more for it than you would on the offensive end. So something to keep an eye on there as well. But I'm a big fan of Cade Phillips. I come from the grit and grind Grizzlies of Tony Allen being my favorite player. So it doesn't take very long for a player with the intangibles of Cade Phillips to kind of steal my basketball heart. I really enjoy watching him play with the effort that he does and do all the nitty gritty, dirty work that it just isn't appreciated as much as it used to be, with the focus in basketball now being on shooting and perimeter play and 3-point shooting and so on and so forth. So I certainly appreciate Cade's game, and I think he's going to be a key role player for Tennessee this season and help them win a lot of games because of it.
Yeah, and I like it too in moderation, because I think one thing that helped Tennessee a lot last season was that Tennessee could finally play a lot of different ways effectively. And that helped Tennessee get to where it got at the end of the season, right? I mean, that helped Tennessee do what it did, that it could beat man, it could beat zone, it could go big, it could go small, it could go fast, it could go slow. And the more things you can do, at least at a solid level, the more teams you'll be able to beat, right? I mean, you can either be so good that you play your style and it almost always works, or you have to be good enough to do a lot of different things at a pretty high level. And I think, I think this team can do that. I do. And I think, Ben, last thing I've got is, for me, it's one of the most enjoyable things about early in a basketball season, in any basketball season, is you kind of start to put on paper, even like in this era where rosters change all the time, there's still, elements of a team that you have a pretty good idea about going into a season. Guys improve, obviously, but you see teams sort of develop like an identity, and you see teams kind of develop who's their guy and what, or who's their guy for this, who's their guy for that, how are they going to be offensively compared to what you think? How are they going to be defensively? Because basketball sometimes, unlike some other sports, like you have to completely change your plan completely, like that during the season sometimes, because the guys get hurt or guys can't make a shot at all, or teams start finding this one hole in your game and exposing it relentlessly, and you have to reinvent yourself a lot during basketball season in a way that you don't always have to unless your quarterback gets hurt in football or something. And I like that. I like watching teams sort of evolve from what they are at the beginning or what you think they might be to what they, become. Because I think Rick Barnes would tell you, I mean, he's always confident that he's got a good idea about what to do, right? He's Rick Barnes. He doesn't regret things. Think he regrets things? Nah, not really. Goes on. But like, he would be the first to tell you probably that there are times where he has had the complete wrong idea about what a team could and couldn't do. And that's kind of the fun part for me of watching a basketball season.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think Rick realizes that as well. He spoke in a recent press conference about how players make you adjust as the season wears on, because they get better throughout the course of a season. They surprise with how much production they are able to give, and then there's also players that don't live up to your expectations and play to the level that you anticipated going into the season. I mean, truly, they did not think that, speaking of Dalton Connect, they did not think that they were going to get that from Dalton Connect. They knew that he was a scorer. They didn't realize he was that type of scorer. They didn't realize that they had a first-round pick, SEC Player of the Year, Elite Eight conductor on their roster. They knew they had a good basketball player. They just didn't think they were going to get that much production from him. So, and this was literally this time a year ago that they did not know that they had that from Dalton. They were beginning to realize it with some of those early season performances, the Michigan State exhibition. They went to Hawaii last year to play in the Maui Invitational, had a couple of nice performances, but I remember there being some rough offensive outings out there as well, and people freaking out about the offense after a couple of those games in Hawaii, which is funny to think about now. But we'll see how it plays out. Good coaches adjust, and the crux of your point, I think, was that Rick Barnes is going to have a lot of tools in his toolbox this season. They're going to be very versatile. It's going to look different than last year. There's going to be more pieces to play with. Now, part of that is getting Cameron Carr and JP Estrella healthy. Those are two young guys that you need to take the next step this season and be significant parts, or at least reliable parts, to the train as they try and make another run at it. But I absolutely believe that this is a really good basketball team. And if they can just piece the pieces together throughout the course of the regular season, then they're going to have yet another chance once the tournament rolls around to do something special. Yeah. And a lot of it is because of the point that I was trying to get to, is the versatility. That's what is going to make them so good this year. To your point about last year, one of the different things we saw from Tennessee was their ability to, if plan A wasn't working, they had a plan B or plan C to go to. And that was kind of somewhat of a knock on Rick early in his Tennessee tenure, is that, when things weren't going well, just tried to continue to force a square peg into a round hole. And the last 2 years, including this year, that has not been the case. And I think that'll be the case once again, because you can, there's a lot of versatility, players with versatility that are going to allow them to do different things. And it starts with Igor. I mean, I said it from the moment they picked up his commitment. He's not Grant Williams, of course, offensively, but he is the most versatile four that Rick Barnes has had on offense. And that is going to allow them to do a lot of different things and play to different matchups throughout the course of the season, which is what basketball is. It's such a matchup-oriented game. That's why the NCAA tournament is so difficult. And last year's team was able to adjust to different lineups that they saw. I think this year's team is going to be able to do the same.
Yeah, at the professional level, there are a lot of 6'10" guys who can do all the things that Igor Milicic Jr. can do. At the college level, there are not. There are not that many 6'10" guys, true 6'10" guys, who can do all the stuff that he can do. I mean, he is, the way he sees the floor, how comfortable he is with the ball in his hands, the passes that he'll make. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that when he starts to open up the floor, Sakai Ziegler gets a whole lot more deadly and a whole lot more accurate because he doesn't have to carry everything. And I think that this is a big, big, big development for Tennessee. And he, to me, absolutely. Cade Phillips has been fun to watch, but Milicic has been the surprise of the season for me. Like, there's no question about it. Every time I watch him play, I become more and more confused by how erratic things were for him at Charlotte. And maybe, I know they played slow. Their tempo was like the worst in college basketball, so they had fewer opportunities for stats. I get that. Maybe he certainly didn't have this caliber of teammate around him. But I mean, you're talking about a kid who has some international experience, whose dad's an international coach. He's got all kinds of game. I mean, I think there's a pretty high ceiling for this guy. Not in terms of like, he's going to be like a 10-time NBA All-Star. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is a hell of a college basketball player who looks like he could be a pro. And that is,
he is a pro. It's just a matter of if he gets he's going to get an opportunity in the NBA. I mean, all good college basketball players do, right? He will absolutely be able to sign a two-way contract, I think, or certainly sign with a G League team. And if not, then he will have plenty of options overseas and he'll be a 10, 15-year pro. It's just a matter of where.
Yeah, and the very last thing that I have, Ben, is that Dalton, you were talking about Connect. Just for fun, I looked at where he was 2 years ago today. So 2 years, like last night, he puts up 37 points in a win over the Jazz, right? And LeBron and AD are going crazy for him and all these things and saying how great he is. And 2 years ago, he was on a Northern Colorado team that lost 83-36 to Houston, 95-62 to Baylor, and then lost by 11 points at home to San Jose State. That's where he was 2 years ago. And in those games, Houston, 7 points, Baylor, 12 points, San Jose, 20 points. Then they lost to Colorado on the 22nd, and he scored 21 points. So that's where he was 2 years ago. I mean, if that's not like a message to kids to bet on yourself, then I don't know what is. Like, that is, my goodness. I mean, he just continues to prove every single person who doubts him wrong. He is really, really good. And I will never, two things. I will never understand how he fell where he did in the draft. And two, best thing that could happen to him. Because all of a sudden, like, if he's a top 5 pick, we all know how much pressure's on a top 5 pick. We all know how, you know what I mean? Like, that's a lot. But he goes to LA, which is pressure, but he's with some good players around him, some vets.
He fell because of the defense, from my understanding. The defense and the age, which the age to me is silly. I've always said this. I hate how the NBA drafts. It is all on age and potential, and sometimes you hit, and sometimes there are your obvious one and done players. Previously, your high school players that were guarantees to be all-stars. But there's a reason that a lot of one-and-done players, more than not, flame out very quickly in the league because they're not prepared and they're not ready. I hate the way the NBA drafts, and it's in large part why you see the same teams drafting towards the top nearly every year. But
yeah,
the age should not have. I can understand a team being weary of the defense, but the age thing is kind of silly to me because how old is he? Like 25?
23.
Oh, is he 23? Again, 23 years old. I mean, the players are playing until now it's more their mid-30s than 40, like when I was growing up. But, I mean, that's still – you could get 10 – we'll say you can get 10 to 15 years out of Dalton Connect. And if he is the best player or one of the best players, why would you not want that for 10 to 15 years compared to somebody younger than him that you maybe get for 15, 20 years? It just – that baffles me. I know the Grizzlies, they may or may not have passed along that they were going to draft him and elected to go with a center, which I do get that one more than others. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Grizzlies fan. We desperately needed a center after Steven Adams was traded and dealt with injury. And you had Donovan Clingan from UConn go to Portland a couple of picks before Edey went, and there were no obvious centers in free agency, so you kind of had to have a center. And I know Tennessee fans don't want to hear this, but up until these last couple of games from Dalton, Zach Edey was playing better than Dalton Connect. So both look like they're going to have strong careers. Edey's got an ankle injury right now. Apparently the injury bug is – the Memphis Grizzlies cannot stay healthy to save their life, and apparently that injury bug has made its way over to Knoxville as well.
Yeah, no kidding there. I do think that with Connect, you get 7. If he stays healthy, you get 7 or so years where he's still an elite athlete, and I think he is an elite athlete. And then you still get 6 or 7 more years where he's a catch and shoot 3 guy that
stand in the corner and catch and shoot.
I mean, those guys can play a long time. Just stand
Vince
there.
Vince Carter, who is arguably one of the greatest athletes to ever play in the NBA, when his athleticism left his body, when Father Time caught up, he developed his three-point shot, and he added his time in Dallas and his time in Memphis, which was like 5 to 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, added on to his NBA career because he developed a shot and he just stood in the corner and shot the basketball and made him when it mattered most.
Yep. There you go. You can do that. So we'll see. I mean, this is going to be a fun week for Tennessee basketball. It'll be, well, we'll see if it's a fun week. It should be an instructive week. It should be a productive week in terms of lessons learned, hopefully results and lessons learned, but at least lessons learned. We'll see where the health thing is. Don't want to minimize the migraines as someone who has them. Sometimes I can understand why Chaz Lanier may have wanted to crawl into a dark hole and die when he was having one. They suck, but he looks all right now, or seems all right now. So, but we'll see with Carr, we'll see with Estrella, we'll see what goes on this week. Maybe some salt water, and some non-alcoholic daiquiris will help him out a little bit. And we will see how things go from there. You got anything else, Ben?
I do not. Appreciate you.
Well, you know what? I don't have anything else either. So for Ben McKee, this is Wes Rucker. If you're watching here on YouTube or Facebook, you will see the outro. If you are just listening, then or you will not see it. If you are listening, you will hear it. So we're still working on figuring that one out. So regardless, thanks for being here, Ben.
Thanks, Wes.